Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we're going to cover the magical electional opportunities that are going to be popping up between the Aries Full Moon on October 1st until the Libra New Moon on October 16th. So let's go ahead and just kind of dive right into it, starting of course with the North American continent. So our first electional opportunity for the North American continent is going to be on October 4th at around 2:30 a.m. And here we're looking at an opportunity for a third Lunar Mansion talisman. Now the third Lunar Mansion is one of my favorites, and it is of course for the acquisition of all good things. Now, because this is a waning moon period, the ability for the third Lunar Mansion to be able to manifest a lot of those all good things is going to be a little bit muted, but it'll still be there. So this is going to be kind of a great situational talisman where if you just kind of like need some help now, this is a good opportunity to do that. Just kind of keep in mind that there will be better opportunities in the future, especially when we can get the moon phase to be more appropriate. So taking a look at the election itself, we've got the third Lunar Mansion, no. So taking a look at the electional chart itself, we have the moon here in the third Lunar Mansion, exactly where we want her, kind of close to the midheaven, which is perfect. And at the same time, she's applying this trine aspect to Jupiter here in Capricorn. Jupiter in Capricorn, not doing so great in a sign of fall, but having the moon, especially this exalted moon, applying a really nice trine to this benefic planet Jupiter is exactly what the doctor ordered. But this is kind of what I mean when I say like it's a good kind of situational talisman, but there are going to be opportunities for better ones later, like getting the moon to apply to a more powerfully placed benefic planet instead of one in fall. Things like that we can suss out later on. At the same time, we have Leo here on the ascendant, which points us to the sun here in Libra. And right now the sun's doing okay. We're getting kind of close to the no-no spots, we'll say. The square of Saturn and the opposition to Mars. Those are a little bit later on in Cancer, very much more towards the end, but we're kind of getting close to that. So the sun is going to kind of fall off of our radar as for a planet that we'll talk about in regards to electional spotlighting, essentially. Alright, so our next electional opportunity is actually going to be for a couple days later on October 6th at around 10:46 p.m. And here we're going to shoot for a 6th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 6th Lunar Mansion is one that is more about romantic love and engendering positive relationship experiences based off of that. So not necessarily a sexualized and not necessarily like platonic in that sense, but it probably could be with enough working. There are a few other mansions that are a little bit better for like friendships and kind of creating goodwill generally between people, whereas the 6th Lunar Mansion is a little bit more expressively romantic in its imagery, so potentially very possible, but not exactly the right fit, we'll say. We have to squeeze the foot into the glass slipper a little too hard on that instance. So, platonic relationships and engendering and fostering goodwill and friendships and repairing friendships or making new friendships possible, not completely off the table, but not exactly what the doctor ordered for this talisman. And as for the electional chart, we have the moon placed here in the first house in the 6th Lunar Mansion, while at the same time applying this trine to the sun. And I've said this a million times, I really enjoy sun-moon aspects, especially sextiles, especially trines. When it comes to relationship type talismans, they work really well together. So being able to have that here, finding out that this was going to be the mansion that had the moon sun trine this go around, I was like, I have to have this one. And the chart itself kind of worked out pretty well. At the same time, we've got Taurus here rising on the ascendant, and that puts us with Venus here on the cusp of the 5th house. In Virgo as the ruler of the 1st house, and Venus is unafflicted by Mars and Saturn. Right now the mutable signs and the fixed signs are pretty safe, whereas the cardinal signs are like, the flashing red danger zone to stay away from. The cardinal signs are lava, essentially, while the mutable and the fixed signs are pretty safe right now. So why did I pick the Taurus rising instead of potential Gemini rising to get the moon closer to the ascendant? You can definitely do that. The difference is you would have to trade Venus here in for Mercury, and I didn't really like that trade, especially because Mercury is slowing down to go retrograde very soon. So I didn't want to have that energy kind of involved. Now that I'd say that out loud, one thing that you could do if you prefer, or if you're in this situation, having Mercury go retrograde. Retrograde planets often kind of bring back up or kind of make us face our past again. Some sorts of like situation or event in our past, Mercury retrograde pulls back up. So a talisman for the 6th Lunar Mansion with a starting to station retrograde Mercury could actually be used positively for sort of like rekindling an old romance. Maybe if you and an ex have started to get back together or make steps to get back together, that kind of thing. The Mercury retrograde could be useful because it kind of matches the symbolism of kind of the events with the story that's unfolding, because there's like a returning back to something. So it could work out really well for those kinds of situations. But if you're not in that situation and you're trying to like develop a new relationship, or something, or like continue a current one or something like that, like intensify a current one or something like that, then go for the Taurus ruled Venus ascendant. Our next electional opportunity is actually going to be for an Algol fixed star talisman. Algol is a star that I think we featured a little bit more probably than any of the other ones, if only because of the position of Saturn right now, making it kind of pretty easy to make Algol talismans. Saturn at the end of Capricorn lines up really nicely with the moon coming towards the end of Taurus, as we'll see, even in this chart here. So Algol kind of keeps popping back up. Algol, of course, is good for protection, especially spiritual protection, and especially more aggressive spiritual protection. And by that I mean Algol kind of like goes out and like seeks and destroys things that are trying to harm you, or the place where the Algol talisman lays. So for the electional chart itself, what we want with fixed star talismans is we want the moon to be applying towards the fixed star, and we have that. Algol is placed at roughly 24 degrees in Taurus, so the moon at 20 degrees of Taurus is of course moving to that, while at the same time this degree and the moon here will be placed on the midheaven, which is exactly what we want. Let's move that up a minute so make that more visible. So while that's happening, what we want is we want the moon to apply to a planet which is of the nature of Algol. And Algol is classically of the nature of Saturn and Mars. And like I was saying before, with Saturn here at the end of Capricorn, we get this nice ability for the moon to just apply these lovely trines while she is in the end of Taurus. So we have that happening. And, at the same time, we're going to keep the sun pretty safe here, still in the middle of Libra, not so close to the end to have to worry about the bad spots from Saturn and Mars, which is great. At the same time, we have a nice present here with Venus. Oops, here we go. At the same time, we have a nice present with Venus placed in the first house, almost conjoining the ascendant, bringing a nice sense of like balance and calm and peace to it, which might be a really great addition for people who don't really want to kind of touch on the more aggressive sides of Algol. This is like a more pacifying influence. So if that's something that you're kind of more worried about, you don't really want to mess with Algol because you don't like the idea of like an aggressive protector, totally fine. I get you. It's kind of uncomfortable. But here with the Venus rising, it's a little bit more passive, a little bit more docile. So it should be able to serve a little bit better, kind of keep some of those concerns or fears at bay, and all in all form a really nice protective talisman. Of course, having said all that, the fact that the square in opposition are getting kind of close might be enough to kind of put you off of it. And if that's the case, definitely take that intuition. Don't make a talisman that you're not comfortable with making, especially one that's a little bit more kind of like malefically aggressive oriented, like Algol. So if you think that the squares in opposition between Mars and Saturn and the Sun are a bit too close, definitely tap out for this one. I think they're pretty far enough away to not really be noticeable, but they are starting to get more in orb. Alright, so our final opportunity for the North American continent is actually going to be for October 8th at around 11:15-ish p.m. And here we're going to have an opportunity for an 8th Lunar Mansion talisman. Now, the 8th Lunar Mansion is one that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I think this is the first time I'm getting to in this series. The nodes have been, at the end, well, I guess technically the beginning of Cancer and Capricorn for such a long time that you weren't able to really make an 8th Lunar Mansion talisman. And even now, the nodes are just kind of now getting to the middle of Gemini and Sagittarius, so we're still kind of within the weird zone of like eclipse moony stuff that we don't really want to get involved with. But here we have an opportunity for an 8th Lunar Mansion talisman where I feel like the moon is comfortably enough away from the node to not really have to worry about it. So here we've got the moon. Oh, and the 8th Lunar Mansion is one that's primarily about victory. And this can be victory in either literal senses or more metaphoric senses. So kind of, I guess, classically, the 8th Lunar Mansion was supposed to be used for like victory over another person. More probably within the context of like battle. Like it was more of like a war victory talisman. But of course there are other ways, non-violent ways, that you can be like in conflict with another person. And so it can even serve you, if you're going to war, sure, it can probably help you with that. But if you're going to war in more like metaphorical sense, like litigation, it can probably be very helpful there. In any sort of like competition or contest, it can be really helpful there, especially if you're directly competing against other people, very helpful. So situations like that, victory, supremacy, stuff like that, the 8th lunar mansions can help you with. Okay. So taking a look at the electional chart itself, we have the moon in the 8th lunar mansion, here placed conjoined the ascendant, which is perfect for what we want. The moon is also sort of getting into the no-no lava zone of cardinal signs, but that's going to be much later. You can see the square with Mars and the opposition with Saturn will be towards the end, past the 20th degree mark of Cancer. We're in 6 degrees, so we've got a lot of room here. And at the same time, the moon's going to be applying this sextile to Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo, inner fall, kind of the same things that we said about Jupiter in Capricorn in our initial chart. But the fact that Venus is a benefic planet is going to bring us a lot of help here, even if she's not doing so super hot herself. Other than being, in Virgo, she's not afflicted by Saturn or Mars. She's not hurt. So she can still bring us some good fortune. And of course, kind of the same thing with, here the moon is waning, not super great for what we want. This would probably be more, victory, success in a situation like this is probably something that we would more want with a waxing moon. But if you are in a situation where you need help now and you can't really wait for 4 or 5 more months for the sun to get around to where the moon in Cancer is waxing, then you got to do what you got to do, and this could probably be a really great kind of band-aid talisman with the implication understanding that there are going to be better opportunities for it later. So now we're going to transition into the Western European electional charts, and here we're going to start on October 6th at around 4 a.m., and it's for a 5th Lunar Mansion talisman. Now the 5th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily for learning, study, acquisition of information, and can also be utilized for dream visitation experiences by spirits, especially helping people to have or control or create more prophetic type dreams or more lucid dreaming type experiences. Here we have the moon placed in the 5th Lunar Mansion, close to the midheaven, while at the same time she is applying the square to Venus here in the 1st house. Now, of course, you would typically want more harmonious aspects like sextiles and trines, but squares are fine. Squares with benefic planets especially are not a problem. At the same time, the ruler of the 1st house is the sun, because we have Leo on the ascendant, and the sun is here in the middle of Libra, still far enough away from kind of the bad spots with the Mars opposition and the Saturn square to not be necessarily influenced by them at this time, but we're starting to get closer to it. Sort of my one concern with this chart, and I don't normally pay super close attention to these kinds of things. I'm not very sure that they're that important. But my kind of one concern with this chart, that's maybe more of like a question mark type of thing, is Mars's position here in the 9th house. And that's because the 9th house specifically rules over dreams. And usually when you have, and this is especially true with people with natal configurations, but having malefic planets like Mars in the 9th house or ruling the 9th house gives them kind of like a Mars flair, to where they tend to be a bit more nightmarish, or there may be themes of like being hunted or chased, or be hunting or chasing something, or they may be kind of more violent in their imagery. So I'm a little concerned that the Mars position here might kind of spoil the talisman, or otherwise make the dream experiences less pleasurable, like less pleasant. So something to keep in mind with this one. I don't think it would hurt too much for the acquisition of knowledge, for help in study, for help in learning, which is something that the 9th house can also signify. But I think kind of the more dream aspect of it might be something to not pursue as much with a specific configuration. Or, if you're super brave and you have dreams like that all the time, this just might be normal for you, and that's totally fine too. It might help you take more control in those dreams and be less of like the victim in those situations. So our second electional opportunity for Western Europe is going to be that same day, the 6th of October, much later at night, here now closer to 9 o'clock. And this is going to be for an opportunity for that 6th Lunar Mansion talisman that we talked about in Western Europe. I'm sorry, that we talked about in North America, not Western Europe. And we have kind of like a similar setup with this chart and with that previous chart. So we have the moon here placed in the 6th Lunar Mansion, and she's applying now the trine to the sun, while kind of the square of Venus hits more close to the ascendant. And kind of the same rules, I would say, with the North American version of the chart. If you're in the process of creating or looking for a new relationship, or if you're working on repairing or, intensifying or otherwise solidifying a current relationship, then you want to use the Taurus ascendant, a late Taurus ascendant. But if you're kind of like going back and redoing a relationship, either with, a partner that you've already been with before, in the case of an ex, or something like that, then moving into the Gemini ascendant to get the Mercury, who's about to station retrograde, is appropriate and is fine to utilize. But otherwise, I would stick with the Taurus ascendant just to get kind of like the stability and the consistency more of Taurus and Venus. Our next electional opportunity for Western Europe is going to be on October 8th, now around 22:48, so closer to 11 o'clock at night. And here we're going to have that chart for the 8th Lunar Mansion, so a Western European version of the North Americans' 8th Lunar Mansion. The 8th Lunar Mansion, of course, being the one about victory, especially over another person, whether in combat, litigation, or some other kind of competition. And the chart itself is very, very similar. We've got the moon here in early Cancer. We've got the moon here in early Cancer. Gotta use my pen. With the conjoined the ascendant also in early Cancer, the node is far enough away to not be such a worry at this time, as are the square of Mars and the opposition of Saturn. And at the same time, the moon is applying that sextile, that same sextile that we talked about in the North American version with Venus. Here, Venus is a bit more angular than she was in the North American version, but still, unfortunately, placed in Virgo. Not going to change that fast. But we're still kind of leaning into the more benefic powers of Venus to be able to bestow victory upon our talisman bearers. And of course, we've got the moon here ruling the first house, so we don't have to worry about the conditions of a second planet. And that's sort of the advantage of having Cancer on the ascendant. The moon, it gets to play both parts, so you don't have to worry about the configuration of a second planet potentially messing up your election. The moon can handle the whole job. She's perfectly capable. And this is an example of that. It's why talismans for the 8th, 9th, and 10th lunar mansions are oftentimes a little bit easier to get and to create, because you don't have to worry about a second planet if you can get the Cancer ascendant. So now we're going to transition into our Australian electional charts, and unfortunately there are only two for Australia, and they're kind of back to back on October 6th and October 7th. Our first one is for October 6th at around 3 a.m. And here it's going to be the chart for the Algol talisman. Algol is, of course, the more protective, more aggressively protective fixed star. And here we're going to have the moon kind of like right on top of this star, conjoin the midheaven here. And at the same time, she's going to be applying that trine to Saturn. Saturn, of course, being one of the planets who is said to be of the nature, or who Algol is said to be of the nature of Mars and Saturn. At the same time, we're going to have the sun as the ruler of the first house here. In the middle of Libra, far enough away from Mars or Saturn to not really be a problem, and we're still going to have that Venus placed in the first house, like we did in the North American chart, further from the ascendant, of course, but still there kind of to help pacify things. So this can be a really great opportunity for the Algol talisman, especially if you're somebody who's a bit more concerned or kind of put off by some of the more aggressive characteristics or stories that kind of float around about Algol. This can be one that's a bit more muted because of the Venus presence. So definitely take that as an opportunity to go ahead and dive in with this star if you've been interested in it, but kind of more hesitant for whatever reason. So our next Australian chart and our final chart for this video is going to be on October 7th at around 3:15 a.m. Australia, you're going to have to, wake up early or stay up late for these, I guess. And here we have that chart for the 6th Lunar Mansion talisman. Again, the chart that's for relationships, but this one's a little bit different than the other ones have been because we're not having the moon on the ascendant, so our choice isn't then between, late Taurus for more stability, preservation of relationship, or early Gemini maybe for a retry or a reroll in a relationship. Now our option is solidly within the sign of Leo, so we're going to have the sun to deal with, which is much more of a pretty stabilizing egalitarian presence. So either way, you're going to do pretty well with this chart here. And here we're going to have the moon in the 6th lunar mansion conjoin the midheaven, and at the same time she's going to be applying that trine to the sun, who's also the ruler of the first house. And then the sun is, of course, far enough away from the opposition of Mars and the square of Saturn for that to be a problem. And then we'll also have Venus here in the first house, kind of like we did for the Algol talisman. But Venus here, especially in a talisman for romance and relationships, is a very strong presence, a very strong appropriate presence. So definitely use this opportunity to make this talisman if you are in some sort of relationship need. If you're looking for a new relationship, looking to strengthen one that you're already in, or anything like that. This can be a really great talisman for that, especially with the Venus being in the first house as well. Like, all right, so those are all the electional opportunities that I've got for you guys for the next couple of weeks. We got some really good ones in here, but also at the same time, they can be a little bit of disappointment because we're dealing with the waning moon phase, and a lot of these talismans are a bit more waxing moon phase oriented. So, keep that in mind while you're working with them, that their effects might be a little bit muted or a little bit different from how you may anticipate them coming across or manifesting. And, just keep in mind that, especially with these Lunar Mansion talismans, and especially because they're more moon oriented, they're not exactly made to be super permanent, right? The moon is all about changing and mutation and things like that. So keep that in mind when working with them. If we find an opportunity for a really great Lunar Mansion talisman, I'll let you know. Obviously, I'll talk about it, and really extol it. So for those, definitely consider making them a more permanent and having those more permanent relationships with them. But for the Lunar Mansion talismans, especially if they're not quite right, especially when it comes to like moon phase, just keep in mind that they'll probably be replaced at some point. But they can be really helpful partners now, and this can actually be a really great way to get to know many of the Lunar Mansion talismans that you may not have gotten to know if you didn't, take the step to become introduced to them now when you kind of need them, even if the setup for it isn't exactly 100% optimal. So just something to keep in mind. Always be flexible in your practice. All right, everybody take care, and I will see you all again on the Libra new moon.